Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm Deb Philman, your host, and we are back today for another installment of Defund DEI. If you've not watched the first one, I would recommend that you do at some point. It's got a lot of great information, and we'll introduce you to the way we view DEI, which is sort of as an umbrella that makes all the other little things that we don't like possible. CRT, gender theory, queer theory, SEL, all of it. They each have their role to play, but they all fall under this big umbrella of DEI. So until you get rid of DEI, you're not going to really be able to address the other bad ideas that are going into our kids' heads and through their schools. But today, our roundtable of myself and Mark Ousley, Unwokable, and Rhyen Staley, and Kelly, when she arrives, we're going to be talking about sports. We're going to be talking about sports K through 16, basically, all the way through college. Most people have thought for a long time that, first it was, well, surely it's only in history class, CRT. Well, surely it's only maybe making an appearance in, homeroom or health and sex ed, right? Gender stuff and comprehensive sex ed. Well, okay, maybe they're putting it in science because of the global warming and climate change stuff, right? I mean, maybe just there, but certainly not math, certainly not, sports. Certainly they're going to let the kids run around, play, get healthy, things like that. And here comes Kelly. And hi, Kelly. And you're not going to go invading the kids' sports, right? Well, because of DEI, you can't really stop at the playing field or the locker room. If your whole point is we must have this, So what we're going to talk about today, and admittedly, this is not at all my area of expertise, but Rhyen and Mark and even Kelly know a lot about it. So they're going to walk us through the different ways DEI has its tentacles in school sports. Welcome, everybody. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Hey.
Thank you, Deb.
Yeah, thanks, Deb. I guess, I'll start in just a brief background so that there's a little bit of, and I know Kelly coaches softball, and Mark, forgive me, I don't know, your background in sports, but I've 25 years of coaching. I've coached all the way from fifth grade all the way up to Division I women's volleyball. So I've been the whole gambit, both, middle school, high school, etc., club sports and school sports. And doing it since the 90s, you kind of see the evolution, and you can kind of, paint a picture that way. And so I think what people need to realize, and I guess I'll do an opening statement, if you will, is I hope that people can realize that this stuff is in their club sports. I could tell a story later on about book studies in club sports. University level, their student athletic committee or their student council for sports are starting to do subcommittees of equity, and so forth. So this stuff is, and including the referees, by the way, the referees are sometimes involved with this. So, we can backtrack at some point in this conversation to, maybe how some of this started, but, this is more prevalent than people realize how it's creeped into the athletics realm.
So when you say the referees, can we expect to be seeing rulings based on equity? I mean, I know that sounds extreme, but
I'll give you. You want to start off with an example then?
Yes, please.
I told you earlier. So in 2015, I was building up a high school program, and we only had two coaches, but we had three teams. So I coached both the JV and the varsity. During the JV match, my JV team was significantly better than the other JV team. The referee was making calls that was really lopsided towards the other team, letting them get away with bad plays that we were not getting away with. After the match, the referee comes up to me because they love to give their little stickers so that you can go and rate them. And he thought that he did such a fantastic job that he was going to ask me how well he did. And when I was brutally honest with him, because I also was refereeing Division I women's volleyball at 16 years old, so I've got a referee's background, I kind of informed him that he was god-awful and that he refereed as if he was favoring the other team, where he openly admitted that's exactly what he was doing.
He openly admitted it.
Yep. Openly admitted it because he felt it was his job to regulate the advantages and disadvantages of the game. And that was an open statement from him. So
I'm gonna throw this out there. If you had a basketball team from West Philadelphia and playing against one from, I don't know, the main line or something, pretty sure. Well, no, that's not a good example, because then it would be very obviously in favor of those who had physical superiority for other reasons, because they also were less well off financially. But I mean, let's just take, two basketball teams. One is predominantly black and one is predominantly white. But the stereotype is that, basketball is, I don't think I'm going out on a limb here to say, predominantly something that we see a lot of black athletes successful at, correct? I mean,
can I give you another example?
Oh, there's another example. I'm not too far out of my skis.
So,
okay.
You've actually so when I coached junior high girls basketball, I coached inner city girls. I was the only white person on the team. We were playing in the regional finals against a team that was all white. Now, obviously, to all of us here, that doesn't really matter. Let's put it in different context. My girls were very, very, very good for 6th and 7th grade girls basketball. Very good. Okay. Mm-hmm. And we were playing another team that was a nice team, but they weren't the same talent level by far. My dad was a basketball coach for a long time. He sat in the stands. He was watching the game. Within the last, let's say, 2 minutes of the game, we were up by about 15. He told my sister that within the last minute of the game, the referees would put the other team on the free throw line at least 8 times. They were on the free throw line 10 times. And a large number of those were because of kind of semi-made up calls and so forth. So the point being, to your example, is there was another explicit example from basketball where the referees were trying to at least make it so the game was closer than it really should have been.
Wow. Now, there's going to be people who don't believe us, right? I mean, I'm only saying because these are sort of anecdotal. What do we have? And I believe you completely, but what do we have though that indicates that there's a formal, I don't know how you want to put it, like intention to do this across the board? That there are trainings or things for coaches, for department heads that are saying you need to change your program and you need to focus on XYZ. I know it exists, but I'm not an expert in this. What have you seen?
I want to say one other thing real quick, and I'll answer. And I want to, the other.
I'm just playing devil's advocate because I know there's going to be people out there who go that.
I want to be very clear though that in that basketball example, especially, I don't attribute any kind of level of racism into that. I attribute my team was significantly better than the other team, just from a basketball, from a skill standpoint, etc. And so I want to
leveling the achievement,
fairness.
So nothing to do. Okay, so we're in the fairness, anti-bullying. Correct. Everyone should come out the same realm.
And that's where I guess we can get to later on with the others in conversation is that the fairness stuff that kicked in 80s maybe. The fair play, okay.
Yeah. Here's a trophy for you, a trophy for you.
Well, there's truth to it, right? I mean, there's things that we would agree with out of it, but anyway. So I think from my perspective, it's the fairness. It's we got to make the playing field more fair.
Got it. Okay. Are there programs though that?
Well, what I can speak to, and admittedly, I'm. How they would say on the other side of this issue in terms of I'm a choir guy, okay? But within that realm, it's co-curricular and you deal a lot with the same school structures, okay? But most of my experience with this, and specifically in sports, has been with conversations in the upper echelons of administrations about why this is being pushed. But to get to your specific question, since you asked about trainings, if you look at the University of Oklahoma's in-house national DEI professional development NCORE, they have many videos on the need and how to infuse diversity, equity, and inclusion into the programs, the sports programs at the school as a means to take over the institution. Because if they feel if they can radicalize the students, then they can radicalize the institution.
So it's that
explicit,
deliberate.
Yes, no, and I can give you some videos that we can go through maybe in another stream that I probably should have pulled up. But there are dissertations written about it. That's the video I'm thinking of is explicitly about that, and it's an institutional takeover model via DEI through sports. And to give you some firsthand knowledge on that, when I first met with the University of Oklahoma, I met with 3 of their top brass VPs at OU. Mm-hmm. They explicitly told me that the reason they were pushing DEI was because the students in the athletic programs wanted it, and that's what pays the bills.
Got it.
So there are deliberate training programs, and they have direct influence over not just the DEI apparatus from the college, and this all trickles down, right? Just so it goes right into K through 12, but it directly influences the administration of the institutions, whether it be K through 12 or university.
Got it. Okay. Now I have something that actually Kelly just shared with me. I thought maybe you could speak to it a little bit, maybe. I mean, this says this is a California system, right? Or is that what?
Yep, right here in California.
I know we're all shocked that California would have this.
A lot of people look at us like we are absolutely nuts here. But unfortunately, California is not staying in California. It's spreading. So, I mean, as all of us are in different states, it's really important for people listening just to be aware that, it used to be this opine that Californians alone are nuts. But this wokeness is spreading significantly across the nation really quickly. And so here is an example of, they're using a lot more commonly here in California. They're adding the belonging. So DEIB. And so this is their associate athletic director. Obviously, it's straight out of Berkeley. So no surprise there. As far as the news and all of the excitement surrounding this new position, but it's absolutely coming to athletics. I mean, we're already seeing DEI and B throughout education, K through 12. We're seeing it in county offices of education, state education. We're seeing this intrude into our healthcare. So of course, the goal is to bring this to any and every area, really, because in my opinion, not only is this DEIB work to them all about this equal outcomes and all of these things, but for them, it's also, what is the word I'm looking for? There are so many different words that they use now, but it's one that's typical with ethnic studies. It'll come back to me, but essentially here, it is a social justice aim for education. And I will say that I have heard parents and coaches talk about equity in sports here. And I'm talking about for kids. In the league I coach in, I'm not seeing that. We have a really wonderful league for baseball and softball, but definitely in the public school system here, I'm hearing more stories about equity. So regardless of past experience, how much time you've put in, it's equity sports.
It says here that, his insight and experience to what will be a vital and transformational role. And then it says down here, while Douglas is an educator, he is also an activist, public speaker, and author. Mm-hmm. He's the founder and executive director of the Salt City Center, which seeks to bridge community corporations and university affiliation. So I'm starting to hear like ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. Douglas is also the founder and leader of the annual Back to School Explosion, which brings together a local community basketball program with university K-12 and community partners for impoverished areas of Columbia, Missouri. So, I guess on the surface, of course, people will read this and they'll say, what's wrong with any of this? This sounds great. Why are you having an issue with this? And what's the deal? And to which we say, I mean, my position always has been, what's the problem that he is trying to solve? Where is the lack of diversity, the lack of equality, and the lack of inclusion and belonging? And first of all, why is it their role to have belonging? Sports are meant to be elite. They're not meant to include everybody. So we already have inherent exclusion. You have to try out for teams. You could get kicked off of teams, all these things. As far as diversity, if we're going to do that, then we better start looking at the teams that are predominantly if we're going to talk about race, one race, or, does this necessarily mean we have to let anybody play in any team and it's too exclusive to have a men's team and a women's team, or only too exclusive to have a women's team? Because I don't see a lot of trans men trying to get on the men's sports. There are probably some, but I don't see that as the issue. The issue is always going back the other direction. So what is the alleged problem that they are trying to solve? I'm not seeing it.
The alleged problem always goes towards power. So you got to talk about coaches. You got to talk about leadership. You got to talk about athletic directors. And they use that as a diversion from the fact that university sports and elite sports are usually dominated not by white or Asian people, right? They're usually dominated by African Americans, and that's always what they're talking about, because we've got to remember that this is all about power. And so when they use DEI as kind of a shell game, right? You got critical race theory as the table, but it is always about how can we use the institution, or how can we take over the institution and dominate our ideology within the institution. And so it's interesting that he's from Columbia, Missouri. I'm from Columbia, Missouri. I was born in Columbia, Missouri. I've written papers on what happened in Columbia after the Michael Brown incident. And there's a mode of operation here in the universities that is pushing this message and using Michael Brown is the example, right? They had a big uprising. The first time you heard Black Lives Matter was after Michael Brown. Mm-hmm. And the University of Missouri was Yale and Evergreen and MU were the kind of centers of the activist movement of BLM as that was starting. They're the first ones that came. You can go back and you can find videos of all of the protests and things that happened there. Their push at that point for the university was to go into the SEC. And that's another parallel between these things, is that the SEC is by far the most profitable conference. It's by far has the schools that represent the largest minority populations in sports. Not just in sports, but in when you talk about LSU, you talk about Alabama, right? Mm-hmm. And they use this the DEI model and those words, as we have all talked about over and over again, as kind of a feint towards getting power within the institution. They're not upset with the lack of representation in the players. They're upset with the lack of representation in the power centers within the institution. And then that goes into it incentivizes the university to push that direction, especially when you're talking about going to the SEC, where you're going to have a lot more money. You're just going to make a lot more money, whether you win, lose, or draw.
Well, this I think is important too, that especially if we're talking about money and power, this last line, it says, I believe we are going to be the go-to location as it relates to the wellness and prosperity of our student athletes. The wellness and prosperity of student athletes, I thought that they were amateurs, first of all. Second of all, this is the Cal system, right? This is state. These are state schools. Then it says, in particular, our Black and brown student athletes. No, there's not supposed to be an in particular. There just isn't. I mean, there are people who even argue that Title IX was a little problematic because of, in particular, women, but that can be explained in other ways for other reasons, et cetera, because we're dealing with sports, we're dealing with physiological differences and so on and so forth. But that's a debate for another day. And of course, now apparently we're not dealing with physiological differences. It's all anyway. But in particular, Black and brown is a clear violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Is it not? Or am I crazy?
No,
I mean, how do you come into a department and openly say, for the purpose of public relations and public communication, that you taking public dollars for your salary and working at a public institution are intent on doing something in particular for certain students? Yep. And based on race, okay? Because people say, but what about special needs? And then based on protected. Right.
Class. Yeah.
And this is a good highlight for people listening where, let's go back to the education for just a second, where like I wrote a dispatch for Atlanta Public Schools. Their DEI officer openly says that they're not colorblind, that they're color brave or whatever language they're using. And this is an example of, ditching the color blindness, because I think this entire group here, and I'll speak for myself for sure, I could care less what the kids look like or where they come from. I've probably coached more low socioeconomic minority kids than I've actually coached white kids. It doesn't matter. But I will add this too, with the power and stuff. What I've seen, and I'll speak mostly from volleyball, especially from the collegiate angle, is there is a drive in volleyball general. Now, what the audience needs to understand, if you're not familiar with the volleyball world, is that women's volleyball is actually the driver in the volleyball world. Like that's like, if you want to make money, you go to the women's and girls side.
Interesting.
Now, if you want to win a gold medal, as of late, the women's program with the national team has been fantastic. But before that, it was the men's team that you wanted to coach, and if you wanted to win a gold medal. But there's very, very minimal collegiate men's volleyball programs out there. D3 is growing very well. D2 is growing some.
Okay.
But with the women's side is the side that, if you want to be a coach, like if you're passionate about being a coach, et cetera, you're going to go to the women's side. It's where the money and the excitement and fantastic, by the way, don't care. However, if you're a white male trying to get into the women's side, the only way you're going to do that is if you have all the right connections. Because they're literally, 2 years ago, I discovered this in a mailer from the American Volleyball Coaches Association, which is the coaches association across the country. Mm-hmm. There were coaches putting together a Excel spreadsheet of only BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, whatever coaches. That's it. So that administrators and head coaches could hire from that list. Now, were those people using that list? I don't know, but that list was circulating. And and they also have, the AVCA has a program, a diversity program that funds minorities going to these events and getting special perks and all this other stuff, And so it's one thing if you want to say, same thing with education. If you want to say, hey, we want to give extra help and extra training to our teachers, blanket.
Right.
Not a problem. But when you start moving down we're going to only isolate based on a specific race because we want to elevate that race up based on equity.
Right.
Well, now what you're going to do, and this is what we're seeing in coaching, by the way, is you're starting to see some people that are getting elevated that are fantastic. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an insult to them that there are other people getting elevated that are awful. And so therefore you get this, well, I'm an expert. Well, how do you know that they're an expert? How do you know if they're an expert if they've been elevated and some are good and some are bad, and you end up not knowing?
Right.
Well, and it prevents the fixing of that problem, right? Because if you elevate somebody, green, red, yellow, blue, doesn't matter the color of their skin, their gender, say as a coach or whatever, and you elevate them and they don't do well, how do you remove them?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? How do you make a merit-based assessment? It's like, now I think it's probably easier in sports because you're going to have a backlash of people who are diehard fans, and if the team isn't winning, so just coaching, for example, right? It
Mhm.
takes very little. It takes a season or two of a losing record to lose, right? Or to lose your job. But I think that's going to be harder and harder as we move forward, which is going to hold someone responsible for their lack of performance, or just as Rhyen was saying, elevate them because of their quality performance. And I think that's what it all goes down to. And yeah, I mean, that's what it hits at.
Right. It's, it's just so hard to believe. I mean, it's not hard. I don't say that meaning like I don't believe it, but I bet I'm not alone in terms of the audience in saying, how is it that there aren't more people speaking up? I mean, I've seen people fight in sports harder for many, many other things that were not as important. I've seen people fight harder for the infield fly rule to, I mean, I don't make light of it, but you'll see like vigorous debate on all kinds of things involving sports and rules and things. But when it comes down to the basic foundation of why we even engage in any of this, it just seems like the what it seems like is that this is part of the whole effort to undermine excellence in general, possibly with an eye towards eliminating sports altogether. And I know that sounds really crazy and way, way, way out there, but sports, it literally, with the exception of the bread and circuses aspect of it, that keeps us busy when we're adults, watching and buying things in between with commercials, and even with college football and so forth and basketball. It is another area. It's an area for money making, but it's also an area where people do, out of necessity, get separated out by excellence. Like there's never going to be equity in sports for the simple reason that it'll be absolutely impossible to watch. No one will want to watch.
And I think a lot of people, at least from the years of researching just education here, they're afraid to speak up. They're terrified. Unfortunately, they allow that fear to prevent them from really doing what does need to be done. And if the majority of people were starting, I mean, it's not a matter of speaking up in a way that, bring this huge rage. I mean, you can speak to something eloquently, factually, logically, respectfully, and respectfully disagree, and just continue to carry yourself that way while addressing an issue. But the more and more I talk with people, for example, I was at an event, and I just remember college kids saying, I never want my picture taken because, if I'm even delicately associated with fill in the blank, I might not get a job someday. Or, for example, parents, I've had parents tell me, I'm too afraid to address this teacher because then if it gets out that I address this concern from the teacher or it spreads throughout the community, I'm worried I'd lose my job. And these are people who are prominent. They have prominent jobs in the community. I have teachers I know that say, if I speak up, then what the school district will do is then they will find other reasons. And I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen multiple times. They find other reasons to go after that person's job because it's about, the situation that we're in is we're watching this demand for conformity and an eradication of anybody who does not conform. And so if we continue to allow that to occur in our society, in our culture, in our nation, we're going to continue to be railroaded. And we can't let that happen. I know it's a risk for all four of us here to speak up, but it is imperative that we do. We're compelled to do so because it is the right thing to do. And sometimes doing the right thing imposes a certain amount of risk, but it's worth it.
Yeah. That's great, Kelly. No, go ahead, Ryan. Sorry.
Yeah, fantastic. The infiltration, let's say, of DEI, right? You go back to the 1930s with the Communist Party USA, and you're basically talking a couple of institutions, right? You're talking they were really hard going after the church, the education, etc. Well, we're in a different world now, and let's talk about, since we're talking about sports, how important of a role sports plays in our society. And so naturally, because it plays such a heavy role financially, all, from fourth grade, I mean, people are paying thousands of dollars for their kids to get private pitching lessons at 4 years old, 5 years old, when they may not even play baseball when they hit 10, right? So it's a huge institution, and so it's naturally they're going to want to infiltrate that with their ideology. And going back to let's talk about I want to talk scholarship stuff here for a second. Part of the problem for sports like volleyball, wrestling, baseball, soccer, basically anything that's not basketball and football, is that football for sure gobbles up a lot of scholarships related to Title IX. So when you're talking about a women's sport, there is no women's sport that gives off 90-some scholarships. And so when you're talking, let's say SEC football, since Mark brought up SEC, there's no sport that's going to offset that amount of scholarships. So you got to add, like, for that one sport, let's say 5 women's sports. Now the trade-off is that an SEC football school, that football program is going to help fund a lot of the other sports in there. Okay. I know somebody that has inside scoop. Now this is 2006, the University of Wisconsin budget. The women's sports were getting something in the ballpark of $9 million for like 10 sports, something in my number's going to be slightly off, but just to get the gist of it, that the women's sports were getting about $1 million for budget for a year. That's a lot of money even if they charter planes everywhere. Okay. And a lot of that was funded by the football program, right? I mean, Nebraska, I don't know if you remember in the news, 2020, when Big Ten was not going to do football and the SEC was, and the Nebraska coach came out and said they're going to lose $100 million. That $100 million doesn't just go to the football program. That gets divvied up across everybody because there's a little bit of equity there, right? But I also get it. So we talk about, football, for example, there's an issue too with all these other sports going on, but it carries so much power and weight,
right? Because
of the money and the revenue they bring in, that it funds all the other sports, which is why they won't ever take SEC at this moment. They're not going to let it turn into, like, let's say, a minor league for football.
Right.
And they see that as an opportunity to inject. I mean, man, I was listening to the SEC football this last fall a little bit on TV, and it was hard to watch because, like, every commercial or the commentation was always DEI stuff, especially if you know what you're listening for. So go ahead, Mark.
No, well, I think what you're getting into, first of all, let me just, Deb said something about destroying sports. I don't think that the goal is ever to destroy any of this in the sense of keeping the shell. They always want to keep the shell. Think of the New York Times, right?
That's true.
They always want to keep the shell, so it's always going to be there.
They're just destroying the pipeline of elite athletes, and then you're going to end up with boring sports, and nobody wants to. I'm sorry, but
no. Well, you may not end up with boring sports because I think the equity model in terms of officiating or even the quality of the player, it gets worse as you trickle down. As you go further up, it's more noticeable. So they're going to have less and less of that equity thing in terms of having a player on the team who shouldn't be there, so to speak. Right. But I think what you were hitting on here, why this is happening is that when you're talking about institutions in the university, you're also talking about state government. And this is something that I really have a lot of experience in and have a lot of inside knowledge on, is that, the second biggest lobbying group in Oklahoma is higher ed. The reason for that is because of the Oklahoma Sooners. It's because of the football team. 5-6-time national champions, Heisman Trophy winner every year. It is a large draw. That's also the reason you do not have a pro football team in Oklahoma. Okay, because it would take up too much of the, we just got a pro basketball team, I think back in 2012, right? So it's like the outsized influence that has is all because of the money, because they fund campaigns, they fund local government, they fund the local candidates, and I have to bring this up because I think it's very important. It's we have some great officials here in Oklahoma, but they are willing to make deals that protect the university, thinking in their mind. I think we talked about this on our last cast, where a lot of the older, kind of, we would call them rhino neocon. I don't even want to call them that. They just are practical minded. Lots of them are willing to say, hey, this is just a fad. This is just going to go away. We're going to play into that. We're going to make as much money off of it as we can. So we'll follow the pipeline where it goes, because that's where the money's going to go.
Right.
So Oklahoma just passed what it called Save the Women's Sports Act. And this is directly involved with what we're talking about here, because the bill looks very good. But within the bill, let me just couch this. In 2021, this bill was first brought up, and the NCAA started pulling its hair out. We're going to pull every championship from Oklahoma if you pass this.
Right.
And so it stalled in committee, right? But then you started seeing Save the Women's Sports Acts being passed in other states. And my governor's about ready to run for re-election. And so they pass a bill, and it gets all the way to his desk.
Yeah.
And he signs it, and in the bill, it says that one can change the status of their biological sex if they're 18. It says that you can't change your biological sex, but you don't need to change your biological sex if you can change the status of your biological sex.
Right.
Because that's what allowed Leah Thomas to be able to swim, was the status. And so that was it. I hate to give intention, but if you have a bunch of people reading a bill, and then the NCAA, I need to point out, the NCAA, it got all the way to the governor, he signed it, and the NCAA had no comment. They weren't upset. Why? Because within the bill that said we're going to save women's sports by limiting transgender, participation in women's sports, actually allows for that mechanism, especially if you're 18 and older, in intercollegiate sports. And so the money that it comes from the university is what nobody wants to talk about, because nobody wants to deal with it, because it will harm their campaign, it will harm their business. And that's something that we have to start highlighting in terms of DEI. That's what DEI does, because DEI in the corporations meets with DEI in the educational institutions, and they meet in the policy square. And that influences, whether it's government or corporations, the entire direction of a state.
Right.
But when Rhyen says that this has outsized influence, I think sports has giant influence that we are only beginning to tap into, because it can affect everything from your school to your local to your state government.
That's a really good point. And I want to, if you guys don't mind, just take a minute for those who are joining this panel for the first time and didn't see the last show, to very quickly give our high level points. We'll just go around each one of us, kind of fill in whatever the other person didn't say about why we're harping on DEI being a problem in the first place. And from my perspective, it's that DEI is really, first of all, it's a nonsense lie, because you can't really have all those things simultaneously. And it really amounts ultimately to an office or a department or a role that has political commissar kind of purpose to enforce ideological purity within the institution. So it does all the opposite things of what it's purported to do. Anybody else want to add to that? DEI
are divisions of ideological enforcement. Like It's not an office at OU. It's called a division.
Division. Okay.
And their only goal is just like, and they say this in Norman Public Schools, they say this in their training, is to embed this ideology in everything that is done in the institution. And so it's not academic, it's bureaucratic, and it's enforcement of an ideology, political. That's the only reason it exists.
Because, and I'll tie it in with sports too. If you're going to talk about diversity, as a coach, you're going to be looking for different positions, different abilities within those positions, different personalities that complement each other, right? You don't want to have all the same personalities. And there are some coaches that do, by the way. I love to have guys that, and women that were different, like, different leadership skills, but so when you're talking diversity and equity and inclusion, in this case, you're ending up with all the same. They might look different from the educational standpoint, but they're all going to have the same exact ideological bent. They're all going to, and I loved having athletes that had different ideas. I had athletes that thought differently. Some were very creative. Some were very, meticulous, very specific in what they did. Some kids, you'd have to tell them exactly what to do. And others, man, they knew exactly what to do without you telling them. And each one of those has a value, because sometimes you just need them to just go out and get it done. And sometimes you need the thinkers. You need the ones that problem solve on the fly. And that's not what we're talking about now. What we're talking about with diversity, equity, inclusion, especially from the academic standpoint, is that everybody's the same thinking, the same way, and it's the same, race Marxist, woke bent, that you have to think in this critical pedagogy, whatever word you want to put in there. It's that angle and it's nothing else, because as we all are well aware of, try and be at least non-woke, not even conservative liberal, be a non-woke in a school system and speak up and see what happens to you. Right?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm trying to picture the difference now in sports. College sports, I see the money angle more clearly. I see the influence across the institution more clearly, especially from the money and power standpoint. But I'm guessing that when it's K-12 or club sports at the K-12 level, while there'll always be power and influences in play, I feel like there's something even more sinister going on when they use sports and DEI, because now you're dealing with a younger brain, you're dealing with developing bodies. How far, because when we start talking about these things, we're also, it sort of brings up the question of things like trans athletes, in sports and so forth. And it's happening more and more right now at the younger grades. I mean, we see it in college and so forth, but I'm wondering, are they using sports and the coaching staff and the programs to push the queer theory stuff too?
Yep. I want to, from a coach's angle, this is my personal opinion, so certainly disagreement. We'll have diversity in that regard if you choose to disagree. I think up to a certain age, I don't have as much of a problem with boys and girls participating in sports together. I think up to, especially let's say non-competitive, right? Intramural type stuff. You get.
Oh yeah, I played in an all boys team.
Yeah,
That's not what I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm talking about the teams that, where a girl competing on a boys team or a boy competing on a girls team, where I am a boy and I'm competing on the girls team because reasons like whatever, or I'm a girl and I'm competing on the boys team because there isn't a girls team. That to me is a little different than saying we're the elite. We're the state championship swimming team, and people had to try out, and they had to, like hundreds of girls didn't make the team because now we have a boy going out for a biological male going out for the girls team when there is a boys team, for example.
Well, when your whole viewpoint, your perspective is fairness, right? And you can't turn it off. That's when you're going to end up there. You're going to end up with, and by the way, it's not even the gender side of it. It's teams putting bad players on elite teams because of what fill in the gap. Maybe they fill in some sort of quota, or that coach went to some DEI training. For example, the American Volleyball Coaches Association, they have now kind of adopted a woman who's their version of, fill in your DEI consultant. And she's now great. She had 1 year of coaching experience as an assistant coach at U of I, Illinois. And they went on to the Final Four. She had 1 year of coaching experience, and all of a sudden, poof, she is the guru for the entire coaching field with DEI. And I actually have her presentation, and one of her slides in her presentation says point blank, assume racism is everywhere all the time. And she quotes, Kendi and D'Angelo throughout the whole presentation. And she's getting speaking slots at the AVCA. Now she has her own consulting firm for sports, where she's working with universities. So it's a mirror of exactly what you see in the education realm. And so she's working with both club and high school sports. And it comes back to power and fairness from the person on the ground. It's a fairness thing. We can't exclude anybody. We can't have anybody better than somebody else, because if Kelly, for example, and I are playing on a team, and let's say that Kelly is more athletic and she's more gifted in the sport, the more Kelly plays, the better Kelly gets. But if I'm not playing because Kelly's playing, then I'm not getting better. And we can't have that achievement gap, right? There can't be an achievement gap. So how do we equalize that? Well, you start creating rules in the league or by referees, etc., however they do it, that Kelly can only play so much. In fact, everybody can only play so much, so everybody gets an opportunity because of fairness. And so, they start to manipulate. I know Malcolm Gladwell talked about this in one of his books. He talked about how the 12-and-under basketball team was so good. They started the referees manipulated the rules to the league so they couldn't be as successful anymore, to level the playing field. It goes back to my first example with the referee, right? They start to manipulate the rules. And it's the same thing with critical pedagogy in the classroom. The reason they talk about a democratic classroom again is because you can't have the teacher knowing more than the student, because it creates a privileged state.
Mm-hmm.
Epistemological equity.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so I see there's a bunch of links. What would you guys like me to show? So there's some videos. There's something from Clemson. What should we go to first to illustrate some of your points here?
Well, I think the videos will be hard. I just posted the Encore thing where they're talking about the whole mode of operation of how to use sports to influence your institution, your state government. So
why don't you do that? Let's look at the Clemson one real quick.
Yeah.
If you want.
Yeah, let's take a look at this Clemson thing. Hold on a second. Let me grab that.
Yeah, I just wanted to provide an example outside of California, because I get that a lot when I'm talking with people. I hear people say, "Oh, that's California."
Mm-hmm.
No, that's a really good point, and we do get that a lot. All right, and Clemson's like in my backyard practically, or a little farther than backyard, but South Carolina is right there. It's not far away at all. Clemson athletics, diversity, equity, and inclusion. What a pretty little rainbow. What I'm finding interesting now is they're not just doing the rainbow, but they're putting the different shades of brown.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
Color of the crayons.
Who are the blues?
But notice there's none of this.
Or what?
There's none of this. No pink people. There's no pink.
Well, I'm legitimately colorblind, so I can't tell you.
Oh, you're yeah. Well, I what I always notice is there's really no I get sunburn, in January people like me. Yeah. Let's see. Clemson Athletics seeks to provide safe, equitable. They love to throw that word in as if we know what it means to them. An inclusive environment. Every time I see this, you guys, I'm speaking to the audience, not just the panel. Every time I hear a safe, equitable, and inclusive environment for all, I can't help but feel like, what all have you had going on over there? When was it not? Like, where did we just today wake up and discover that people were they were unsafe and things were just terribly unequal in terms of access, and you were shoving people out and being exclusionary for reasons that had nothing to do with merit. I mean, it is sports, so not everybody can be included. It's just regardless of race, gender identity. And see, I can't help but feel like this is the meat of this whole statement.
It is.
Because all the others were included. When's the last time somebody was discriminated against in athletic competition or being on a team because they were L, G, or B? Yeah. I mean, I was in college and I played rugby. I'll leave it at that. Well, so that's not a factor.
And notice what they leave out. They leave out viewpoint.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Diversity of thought.
No, yeah, but I mean, in terms of those immutable characteristics, or supposedly immutable, gender is immutable, but they're claiming it's not, which is kind of odd. They're acting like you can choose whatever you want it to be, but we have to respect that choice, which seems sort of strange because the others are not something you choose. But this seems to be the meat of it, because these others were not discriminated against.
And one of the things that I think is also important to point out, especially to the audience, is that there's phrases being used to promote this agenda that are either a loaded term or a loaded phrase. So one loaded phrase that I see right in there is "for all." Actually, back in 2019, I received word from some teachers that at their California Teachers Association, that essentially "for all" was being said multiple times by the then leader of the NEA at their event. She said it apparently several times, "for all, for all." And then shortly after that event occurred, like clockwork, the California governor rebranded his logo California All, and "for" was highlighted and "all" was at the base. So when we see "for all," it's actually a really loaded phrase that comes with an agenda. Same thing with the word health or transformation or transformative. These are all words that pop out on the screen to me almost as if they were in bold, because there's so much behind them that if you're just coming upon the scene and reading this, you may not know some of these phrases and how they're being used to back a huge agenda. Anyways, the "for all" stands out too.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, and then, this is the other thing that we're seeing in teaching. And now it looks like, as you mentioned, in coaching as well, the inclusive culture, so now it's not just the athletes, it's also career opportunities for coaches and administrators from diverse backgrounds. So this seems like an elaborate justification for discrimination and use of money for very specific political projects.
And they have, if you scroll down, there's 15, I believe, employees dedicated to this particular mission right there.
15. And they're all dedicated to DEI in just in sports. Okay, so next time when you're thinking, but when you hear somebody come election time talking about forgiving student loans, okay, and you think about the cost of tuition, and you think about all the fundraising that goes on for these universities, not to mention the money that they get from the federal government, and if it's a state school, from the state government and so forth, and then you see that they have all of these salaries for these jobs that are, making it look like this is a corporation over here and it's just DEI for sports. That's it. It's literally just the DEI department. And that is the committee leadership team, the DEI plan administrators, the 15 people. So we have 15 administrators. And it's my understanding that that's not that many, that there are schools that have like 50 and more. So,
it's that perhaps their belief in anti-capitalism.
Oh, right. So we're so anti-capitalist that we suddenly had create jobs to just sponge off of actual producers out in the economy. And then when the students can't afford to pay to come to the school that is essentially the giant host on which we are sucking, the blood, then too bad, so sad. We need to go back out there to those producers, suck some more blood, make them feel guilty, even though 50% of them didn't even go to college, never mind grad school, and pay for this. Pay for them to have this little nice, a handy dandy treat. And look at what they're doing. So they have all these little, our work, so essential. Create space and opportunities for feedback and discussion. That's work. That's work now. This sounds like just, don't be a jerk is half of this job description. And then this DEIB celebrations. What? This is all about putting people into tribes and groups. Mm-hmm. This is totally tribal, but we're using sports. What? These are celebrations for this department within Clemson Tigers.
Yeah. You want to,
do they have one for all the other departments too? Yeah. Is there like a DEIB for the English department? Yeah. I'm going to go find out for Brad Thompson if there's a DEI for the Center for the Study of Capitalism down at Clemson.
They are putting a DEI dean in every college at OU. I just sent you actually a link to the OU Athletics DEI Twitter page. And not just DEI, but OU Athletics DEI.
Right. And it's not just in the schools. So what you've got is, I'm looking at a page here with the NCAA. So you've got the NCAA with their whole system of DEI. And then on top of that, the university I was coaching at, which is Division III, by the way. So we're not talking Division I or big money schools. Division III school, where that conference, when I left last spring, they were implementing in their own DEI committee within the conference. And then you have it within the school, and then you have it within the sports department, and then you have it within the student athletic committees, mm-hmm. where you have an equity committee. Mm-hmm. So, you've got this load of bureaucracy going on. And then, by the way, the NCAA runs these summer events where you can send student athletes to them to get further trained in DEI.
Well, and here at OU, we just, Mark Perry just did a civil rights complaint because they're running a camp at OU they sent it to Norman Public Schools, which is literally across the street, right? A camp that's being paid for explicitly, it says in the graphic, just students of color or otherwise historically marginalized students. So they keep out it's a segregated camp and they're paying for it, and so they're trying to trickle down as much as possible. But Rhyen is absolutely right. That's what I don't think that people understand is that what other institution in the university, non-academic, has a dean for their specific, does maintenance have a dean? You know what I mean? Because these are all divisions and offices in the university, right? And they are implanting not just deans, but committees that are informing their informants. And they will walk around and say, this is not inclusive. This is not promoting diversity. So you need to change it. And if you don't, there's a price to pay for that, and it is literally systemic racism. It's systemic discrimination.
It absolutely is this systemic racism. And I'm just shocked that it's just happened. It's been so insidious. They went about it so close.
With sports, the other thing to think about too is what you incentivize, you're going to get more of, right? And I guess it's for everything, right? But let's focus on sports. So for example, obviously, which direction is the culture going, right? So at least with the corporate culture, and when you're talking, and not everybody knows this, but not every school makes money off their sports programs. You talk about the SEC, sure, they're making money. Big Ten, they're making money. But when you're talking other smaller Division I schools, they may be losing money on, let's say, football, for example. A local junior college from back in Illinois, they actually cut their football program a number of years ago because they were $500,000 in the red per year, and they had the guts to cut the program. Now, having said that, Division III schools, especially, they're very population driven. So, for example, when I coached at the university, they wanted me to have about 20 athletes on my roster, because 20 athletes who, by the way, aren't getting sports scholarships, because Division III, you can't give athletic money. They're getting all kinds of other scholarshiping, but they're still going to pay about $10,000, let's say, a year at least, et cetera. So for every kid you have on the roster, that's money you've got in the door. That's how those schools make the money. So what are you going to do? You're going to incentivize what you think will draw the kids into the school, right? And so, with athletics, that is a driver for small schools to improve their population. That's a way. For example, adding a men's volleyball team will add 20 kids to your campus. You add 20 kids to your campus, at least at $10,000 a kid, you're now talking $200,000 on campus that you didn't have before, right? And so what do? You see that, well, these kids want diversity, they want equity, they want inclusion. And so you incentivize that as your model for how you bring kids in. Okay. And so you start to make everything go in that direction. And obviously the power in the end too comes back to these big schools.
Yeah.
But in the other thing, I think I'm rambling a little bit, but I wanted to clarify, the big schools will still want the winners in the end.
Yeah.
They still need, like you're talking about with Oklahoma, Mark, they still want to win in the end. So when push really comes to shove, if they can get away with the DEI stuff and win, more power to them. But in the end, winning will still reign out. The other schools, they don't care about winning as much, generally speaking. The Division III schools, they're more concerned about the population. And I still think that winning helps bring things in, but this group of kids is a little different too now.
But I will say that moving to giant conferences, like the University of Missouri, when it moved to the SEC, and still even up to this point, is not competitive in football. You know what I mean? It just cannot compete against Alabama, LSU, those bigger schools. It should never be in that conference from just a strictly, competitive standpoint. So I think part of what the move in this direction is to do is to de-emphasize winning in terms of what you will bring in monetarily, right? It's that you don't, the big schools will still need to win because that's what's expected of them. OU, Clemson, LSU, Alabama, those are the ones that you've been seeing win over and over again for the past 15 years, right? And we're talking football gets the most, and then you have basketball, of course, which is a whole nother story. But just like you're saying, is that if you can kind of consolidate around this message and put it all into one big pie, equitably dole it out for those smaller schools, they're going to toe the line whether they're winning or not, right? Is that what you're saying, Ryan? Like,
right.
Yeah. Okay.
And with K-12, especially high school. So let's go down a level. With high school, the state associations, and I'll speak for Illinois. Illinois, we had battles years in and years out because when they would do their state tournament, for example, they ran an equitable model. They didn't care. They were open about this. They didn't care about the best teams all being downstate. Let's say Final 8 or Final 4. Did it happen? Sure, it did. But what they cared about was equitable distribution. They wanted equal representation from around the state. And there were years where some of the state finalists were not very good. Like there were better sectional matches, etc. And any attempts to refine that were shot down because they wanted an equitable. And with high school sports, because you're not really talking money, they're doing it because they want to keep parents from ringing their cell phones or their email accounts and throwing hissy fits.
Well, and scholarships.
And right. And because everybody wants that scholarship, right. Which is a different conversation.
Well, and this idea. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say this ideological conformity that we're seeing through DEI and B. Here in California, they're already starting to get to a place where, especially if you're wanting to be hired for a particular job, perhaps at a university, they're wanting some departments already to sign on to a DEIB statement, or more specifically, to share in an interview for a potential job applicant exactly how they will help the university or the school advance DEIB. And essentially, it's set up, as I know many of us have discussed, it's set up like a religion, this race Marxism, and it's very much this elimination of free thought and free thinking, where you have to conform. And it kind of reminds me of what just recently happened, in California specifically, but other areas where people were fired if they didn't take the, vaccine. And so we're seeing this now be a situation where they're kind of setting it up where, do you want to get hired? Well, you need to conform to our ideology.
And this is something I can speak to directly with much experience, because I've worked in K through 12, public and private. I've worked in the college, and now I'm currently still applying for jobs at universities. The most egregious example of what you're talking about, Kelly, is that I've seen is at Portland State University, their choir director job. Okay. This is the title: Director of Choral Activities and Social Justice. That's the title of the job.
Way.
Yeah. Now, this is Portland State, but again, progressivism progresses. And always.
So that basically means if you're not on board with that, then you can't even even apply for that job.
Yeah, that's exactly
basically what prescribing what your political views should be.
Right. Well, and I filled out 91 university collegiate job applications, and one didn't ask for a DEI statement. Just one. That's the only one. So, and that's what I've been trying to tell officials. And because, bringing awareness to this is great, and I think we absolutely have to do that. But we are in a situation right now where if we don't start applying public, loud pressure to officials who can actually do this, because what Kelly was just describing has been going on under the radar throughout universities since 2015. Now it's way more noticeable, but since every application, and here's the other part, it's also designed to spread from the college to the college town, and then outwards. This is what I can tell you about the University of Missouri. It took hold and spread through the university, and then spread into Columbia, Missouri, into the local government, into the school boards. My wife, just applied for a job out there, and one of the jobs, it is a social justice modeled high school. It has become a social justice modeled high school. They have hours a day where they don't track what the students are doing because they want, high school. Free play. They say go wherever you want to go because we want to have this type of freedom. They're going away from grading systems. They're going away from testing.
Okay. I'm so sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm listening to you say all this stuff, and I know it's happening, but it just clicked in my mind as you were talking. Most states that have pretty strict homeschooling rules, one of the things that they get twitchy about, and you can read it right there, is we need to know what you're teaching. We need to know how many hours a day you're teaching. We need to know what the work you're doing, what standardized test you're doing, and do you have a degree to teach this? And Meanwhile, back at the ranch, run by the state, whatever, do what you want. There's no grades. We're not going to test you. Spelling is optional. Use your calculator. It's totally fine. But if we parents unschooled to the degree that they are unschooling, or simply sat home just indoctrinating them, here, sit in front of Fox News. Here you go. There's your place on the couch. There's Fox News. Here's a bowl full of cheese. Go for it. Watch this, and I'll check back with you in a few hours. they would have our heads in a sling, right? I mean, that would just feel like you can't do
Right.
that, but they can do it.
Right. But my point of that is that the officials are allowing this to happen because there's a monetary incentive coming from the universities, predominantly pushed by the NCAA and the conferences. And I'm all about highlighting what teachers are doing wrong and even administrators. But if we do not stop and put pressure on our officials to go after this, not because it's going to, because it's wrong, because it's innately wrong, and that means that they're going to hurt in their pocketbook. Their businesses that they run might hurt. Their political career might hurt. But I'm telling you, if we don't make that push from these officials to say, hey, guess what? A rising tide doesn't always lift all ships. Sometimes it sinks them. That's what's happening, is that they're weaponizing the monetary incentive of university sports to implant this in every school, township, and then spread outward. And then what those townships do is they end up voting in organizations, corporations, to build plants next to their towns. This is happening right outside of Columbia. Guess which one it is? It's the Amazon plant. Amazon is pushing DEI. They're going to have 4,000 jobs sitting right there in the rural part of Missouri, the reddest part of Missouri. And they're now going to get the same kind of trainings their kids are getting in school. Right? And so when you talk about fascism, it's the merger of corporate and government power and influence. And that's what this is. DEI is the link between the two. And so
they make it look so appealing, don't they? Look at the happy, smiling faces. Everybody's happy and smiling, and it's so great. We're celebrating, and it's, we're helping them learn about important history that has shaped the world we live in today. You know what else is really important history that shaped the world we live in today? Western civilization, the history of it. But that's apparently bad. We're not going to teach that. But it sure did shape the world we live in today. It didn't just kind of sand around the edges or sprinkle glitter. It literally built the world we live in today. And I don't mean to be glib, but unless you are literally living in a third world country somewhere in the Amazon or whatever, then you're living in a world shaped by the history of Western European history, primarily. Y'all can criticize me all you want for that, but that's true. But we're leaving that out. And then we have, this is what's important now. Healing from hate. I haven't seen the evidence of the hate. I take it back. This is the evidence of the hate.
Word cloud.
This is the hate.
Look at the word cloud that was just above. That's the thing that strikes me most, because race, justice, white privilege, equity, race, social justice, ally. I think it's just the same words over and over again.
It is.
It's amazing.
And then I love this. As educators, we are charged with the responsibility to help students learn about the important history that has shaped the world we live in today, build their capacity for critical thinking. They don't mean critical thinking like we mean critical thinking. They mean critical pedagogy, and encourage them to participate in civic. This is really the meat of it. They want them to be activists to help make their communities safer, more just, and prosperous. Yep. You're not going to have a more prosperous community after you got done rioting and burning everything to the ground, which is basically what participate in civic engagement means. It's also not going to be safer, but we've seen that. So I'm sorry to be,
there's that word again too, the collectively transform. Anytime
collectively transform, when you guys see collectively transform near each other, first of all, collectively, in America, individuals have rights. Groups don't have rights. We don't. We have rights as individuals and only as individuals. We live as individuals. We go before the law as individuals. We do not go as groups. God forbid we ever do. That's what Nazi Germany did. That's what Mao's China did. That's what Soviet Russia did. It judged as groups. You don't want to be judged as groups. You don't want to be collectively responsible for anything. I promise you that.
Well, and that's why you have the attack on identity, because if you can splinter identity off into so many different intersectional avenues, right? You remove the innate part of what makes you know yourself as an individual. And then you're free to be open. to implant an ideology as a removal of your individuality. They do it within the institutions, but they start with the individual. And that's why the unlearning, at OU we have this called the unlearning series, right? That's literally what it's called. And you're unlearning race, you're unlearning privilege, you're unlearning gender, you're unlearning, and this is the university. And it's like, why would you send your child to a university to unlearn something? But that's the whole focus. And they do that to hollow you out as an individual in your mindset and implant their ideology, and then they hit the go button and they say go. They don't care what happens to you as an individual. They're willing to sacrifice you for the sake of the goal.
Right.
And that is what universities have become. I just talked to a parent recently. She was like, I heard everything you were saying. You gave a speech the other day. I heard everything you were saying, and I completely agree. We need to really stop. But my daughter is going to OU. We're sending her there next, and she's so excited. What do I need to do to stop this, to prevent her from doing this? And I said, don't send her to OU.
I mean, right?
Yeah,
I notice anything missing? What's missing?
The education part.
Oh, you're talking.
Well, there's the education part, but what's missing here? We see Initiative for Racial Equity and Justice.
Mm-hmm.
You notice anything missing? We got African American, Asian American, Latinx, Native American, Black Lives in Santa Cruz, and then ethnic studies. Now, I don't want there to be a little box that says white anything. Right. I never want that. Okay. But ethnic studies doesn't refer to all the ethnicities in Europe or even really, what is Asian?
Explicitly excludes them, actually.
Yeah, explicitly excludes them.
Yep.
Yeah, so Ryan,
this is exclusive. This
Ryan,
is quite exclusive.
Don't get Kelly and I started on the ethnic studies.
I know.
We will co-opt this whole conversation.
Well, we're gonna do a show on that, right? Are we gonna do one where it's DEI and we're gonna talk about ethnic studies? Please tell me yes.
You need to.
Sure.
Okay, but I just had to point that out.
If you scroll down.
Yeah, I saw Kelly.
Yes, I know. I saw your face, and I knew that we both had a agreement there.
We'll tell you some other time.
Okay.
But
yeah, we were talking about sports and we kind of veered into this, but I think what's important is to note that it's the same DEI umbrella that produces this, that also produces this lovely Clemson Tigers, 15 people spending all kinds of money doing stuff like this, like ACC Committee for Racial and Social Justice announces new initiatives. And then we've got, all of this stuff, anti-racism. This is all under Clemson Tigers.
Well, and I want to pull from what the work, I personally, and I know Kelly's been working really hard at the ethnic studies stuff too. And I want to pull into this conversation a process that I've learned / figured out with what they're doing. And I think now it makes sense with the sports side of it. So with ethnic studies, the model curriculum goes that the first thing you do is you start to divide the kids up into tribal groups. You get them they talk about like individual identities, but basically what they're doing is they're trying to tribalize the kids. Okay. So you get them tribalized. Then you spend half the year teaching about how bad Western civilization is and how oppressed and how wonderful these other groups are. Now, we might agree that, for example, Native Americans, we might agree with the stories that they're telling, but the only perspective in that is that colonizers bad, Western civilization, and indigenous groups good. That's it. That's the only perspective. So the culmination to this whole unit is that at the end they have to be activists. They have to be activists, and they use the words, as Kelly's pointed out with words, solidarity and love, by the way, because when they talk about love, it is not romantic love. It is solidarity love. That if I don't stand up and be an ally to Kelly or Mark, then I don't love them. And so now you've tribalized the kids. You've taught them how awful America is and Western civilization. And then you say, now the only way to love somebody and to care about them is that you have to go out and you have to march on the street. And they're implementing this into the university and the sports level because, go back to 2020, I'm going to tell a story here as a coach. In 2020, we're all at home because of lockdowns. George Floyd hits. And I see on social media, because I was following all my coaching buddies from every level, they have all the black squares on their screens. I saw one of my buddy coaches posting a picture of their own white daughter holding a sign saying, "I'm privileged." Their own daughter.
Yeah, it's messed up. It's messed up.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
So the point being is that they have also now become an activist tool, these sports, for the racial justice DEI movement. And they're now, having said that, not all these people are nefarious. A lot of them are just, just like teachers, like Kelly talked about before. Okay. They just want to keep their job. They love coaching, and they're just going to go along to get along. But then they become
people.
Right. So I don't want people to think that all these people are bad actors. But then you get the young kids, the young 20-somethings that are going into coaching, and they're the ideologues now. Because, what one generation, tolerates, the next is going to embrace.
And the thing is, realistically, I hate to say it, but if you're at the point now in the evolution of all this where you're not speaking out or at least pushing back, come what may, it's going to get a lot worse. And so you may not be a bad actor, but you're an enabler. You're big time an enabler. And so whatever you have to do, I mean, I would never expect everybody to stick their individual neck out, but there is safety in numbers. And if you can, kind of coalesce around other people that you're pretty sure agree with you and get a group of people, 6 or 7 people together, you have a little bit more of a buffer to try to push back than just one person speaking out. Because you can't be complacent about this stuff. One of the people in the chat, Unknown Sailor, said, that we were sort of dancing around what this stuff all is, which is evil. And I don't intend to dance around it. It is evil. It's evil because it seeks to do one fundamental thing that is absolutely antithetical to the survival of our species, which is to reject reality. It rejects reality at every step of the way. And whenever you have something that is this elaborate, this widespread, this well-funded, this powerful, that is geared towards teaching children in particular, but even all the way up the food chain, that reality is whatever they decide it should be. And then that reality will be enforced according to very selective criteria by groups and all this other junk. You've got a really bad combination of, psychopathology. It's like I'm living in a delusion where reality is whatever I created it to be, but I'm going to use my superior numbers or my money or my power to force you to accept my reality. Screw your reality and screw objective reality. Objective reality doesn't exist anymore. Science doesn't exist anymore. It's what I say, or that's like mob justice on steroids. And you couldn't design something more evil if you were Satan himself. Maybe, the religious people say it is Satan doing it. So the religious folks are saying this is literally satanic. The people who are not religious are saying it's evil in the secular sense because it's antithetical to life. It's antithetical to thriving and real progress of humankind. It does not sustain anything. It destroys. Well, to me, that's the definition of evil. This isn't sustaining. This isn't making anybody safer. I'm sorry, I'm on a soapbox, but it resonated when I saw that comment. I was like, point taken. We should be calling it out in, unequivocal terms as often as possible. And, come what may, people might say like, oh my gosh, that's so hyperbolic. Tell me how this helps anybody. Tell me how dividing kids into groups and calling out differences and pretending what is unreal is real helps, builds, sustains, grows.
And you're tribalizing one more thing in this. So you talk about the race identity, you're talking about, sex and gender, etc. The next thing you're now tribalizing is by sport, because I've seen this in the volleyball community. If you start like criticizing somebody in the volleyball community in this fashion, the entire community is going to come bearing down on you for the volleyball side of it, not just the LGBT community, etc. So there is that also that next identity level, which is the sport level. Kelly, you're going to say something?
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say there's two key points that I've seen a lot of people make when they're talking about DEIB, is that essentially, in order to have equity, you have to have destruction. You have to bring other people down to equal the playing field.
It's the only way you can do it.
Right. And then, one of the things that, if you remove meritocracy, I think it was James Lindsay that said this, you get an aristocracy. And it does cause this huge widening of, the very, very top and, bringing people down. And unfortunately, there's so many people just openly embracing these ideas. Maybe they're led by their emotions, or they're just so wrapped up, they've believed a lie and they've embraced it. But, like you all said, they're denying reality. It is essentially going into every, whether people call it system or everything that's going on that is Western civilization, the family, the education that we have, our individuality, our freedom, and so many things are all these things. And it's trying to suck out what is and, put in exactly what they want. So, anyways.
Right. Exactly. Any final thoughts on this specific topic before we wrap the broadcast this time?
I want to make a prediction here.
Yep.
I don't really engage in the transgender debate just because I feel like I know enough about it. But one of the things I know is I know my volleyball community. And one of the positive things to the volleyball community is from when I first started playing back in the mid 90s, it was very progressive in a positive way towards the LGBT community. In fact, we had like openly gay athletes and no one cared, right? And that was back in the day when it was like you kept it a secret if you were baseball, basketball, football type of thing. So I give credit to the community there. However, I can see with the incentivizing of the transgender stuff in collegiate sports, let's stay at the collegiate sport level, I foresee that transgender athletes will start to gobble up scholarships in the women's volleyball avenue. I can see that happening because there is a very, and I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just making an observation for those at home, is men's volleyball has 4 scholarships per team versus a women's of 12 to 13. So there's money there, there's scholarship there. And if you're a young gay athlete and you're like, I either have to pay $20,000 to go to college, or I can be transgender and maybe go for free and get a full scholarship. There's an incentive for those young men to become transgendered, to go play in women's sports. And now what's happening? Now actual biological females are losing scholarships. Now I'm making a prediction. Obviously, it may not happen. It may not happen at the level I'm saying it's going to happen. But that is something that if, when you start to incentivize things, you're going to get more of it.
I would agree. And I think that is very likely as well. Very, very likely. Anything else, you guys? Anything else, Mark? About it? Okay.
We have to defund DEI.
I know. We just keep coming back to that. We're going to keep doing these roundtables and bringing you guys. I don't know that it's going to be on an exactly regular schedule, but we will do more, and we'll be back to talk more about how DEI reaches into areas of education and corrupts them and owns them and swallows them up. And so, yeah, defunding it is the goal. Once you decapitate that, then the rest of it should, well, ideally it will fall apart. It'll certainly starve. These 15 people won't have a job anymore, at least not doing this. Mm-hmm. So I thank you guys again for spending your time with me today. I really, really appreciate it. Thanks for sharing all this information. I didn't realize how far it went into sports and the implications. And I bet a lot of people in the audience didn't either. A lot of people come to me and say, I thought it was just here or just here. And it's like, no, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. But I didn't know what it looked like. So, all right. Thanks, everybody. And for those watching on the replay, please like, share, comment, subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye, everybody.